Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, Paul. You know, our show today is about endings and beginnings and of the unspoken time in between the two. As we all know, life is one long journey of beginnings and endings. Projects, careers, marriages, life itself all have an end. Now, beginnings are typically both challenging and inspiring. My personality type is driven to begin new ventures, loves change, and new opportunities. But I must always keep in mind that with beginnings must also come endings. But with an end is also a new beginning. Even with death, no matter what your position on it, there is something that's going to happen after death. Unfortunately, we all too frequently harbor some kind of negative emotion around coming to end, especially an abrupt or unwanted end. However, that certainly doesn't have to be the case. T.S. Elliot, in his famous poem, East Coker from Four Quartets, writes this: "To make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from." And we will talk all about that. In this show today, I'd like to share a new insight that occurred to me more than a year ago. And that insight has to do with really neither ending or beginning, but the crucial time between ending one station in life, and wisely proceeding to the next. It was from this experience I learned what I'm calling, and we will talk about, the value of the tomb, that resting place between a figurative death and a figurative resurrection. Today, producer Paul and I will be spending our time talking about lessons from the tomb. So just from that introduction, what do you think, Paul?
I think I've sat in this chair for 12 years. I've never heard anybody even remotely talk about what we're going to talk about here. So, so this is new. This is new ground for us all.
Would you expect any different?
Not at all. Then it's the next chapter. It's always about turning the page, something new.
Something new. I think the best way to begin this is for me to tell a true story, because this is a lesson learned from a true story. About a year and a half ago, I think it was maybe a year last July. It may have been 2 years last July. My memory does not serve me on this one, but I think it was a year last July. After 4 years or so with the charity that I was working with, I was beginning to feel a bit of burnout, and perhaps it was change for me to do something different. And I pondered, do I resign? What do I do? And it just, after lots and lots of thoughts, this was not just, a 1 week or 1 month thought. This was several months. And I said, I think I've just reached the point that I can't continue. And so I was forced to resign, not forced by someone else, but forced by my own calling. And I think it had to be a bit of fatigue and a bit of what we might call burnout. It was a very difficult decision for me, and it was difficult for the leadership of the organization because I am so immersed in far too many programs and corporate positions, such as vice president of the board. Well, after I resigned, I did resign, and that, I must say, that went over difficult. It was not an easy thing to do. I was asked by the chairman of the board and the CEO not to tell anybody about my resignation for a week, so the nonprofit could prepare an explanation and a bit of a succession plan. And I agreed to that, and I spoke to nobody about my resignation for a week. It all just stayed in my mind. I spoke to my wife, and then after 4 or 5 days of pondering, I decided to speak to my priest. And my priest gave me some incredible ideas. And as I was thinking, did I make the right decision? Did I not make the right decision? He says, Charlie, in the paradigm of Jesus' death, resurrection, and ascension, there's one really forgotten area that we don't talk about, and it's barely written about in Scripture, and it's in Roman Catholic theology and other mainline tradition theology, and that is in between the burial and the resurrection were 3 days in the tomb. What happened in those 3 days in the tomb? And the 3 days in the tomb is what is called, now Protestants don't endorse this, but there's plenty of iconic images on this and writing on this in the Episcopal and Catholic Church. And it's called the harrowing of hell, where St. Peter says that Jesus went down and preached to the prisons in hell. And there is this famous icon of Jesus pulling Adam and Eve and other people out of hell and taking them into heaven. So Jesus was doing some kind of work. Now, that's not necessarily biblical, other than Peter saying that he went to hell to preach to the prisoners.
Is that where they get the term "to hell and back"? He went to hell and back. Maybe. I knew you'd get us off track. That was a good, it's a good question. I wouldn't be surprised if that's where they get the tomb. But what I went through, and this is really important, folks, what I really went through was a crushing time of death, of resignation. And it was difficult because I so loved the organization, but it had just gotten to a point where I was doing so many things that it was very difficult for me. And had not the chairman of the board, dear Pete Callahan, had he not asked me to wait a week before saying anything to anybody so the word didn't get out, what he didn't anticipate was the keen result of what happened from that. It gave me a week to ponder. It gave me a week to ponder and reflect without bitching and moaning and whining and giving all of these excuses and only supporting my presupposed concepts, only supporting that and making it stronger. Rather, I was forced to deal with the positives and the negatives. And as a result, and I'm calling that my tomb experience, I was a week in the tomb. And as a result of being a week in the tomb, I met with the CEO a couple times, and we chatted about things, and we came up with a conclusion. What if we change your role? What if we make your role where you are not quite so busy doing so many things, and we create boundaries, and we just tap right into your strength area and say, this is the way you would serve the organization. And Paul, I got to tell you, it made all the difference in the world. Had I not had that time in the tomb, I would never have gotten there. I would be resigned today. And I would probably be regretting it. But who knows? One cannot anticipate the future. But I think there is a time in major decisions, especially in quitting and beginning something new, that there is a time of reflection. Even if you're totally prepared and you have a new job set up or a new situation set up and you're ready to move into it, there is a time of silent reflection for 3, 4, 5 days that is so rewarding. Does that ring any bells with you? I don't know. I've got to think about this now. Here's my two reactions. One, I don't think many people do that. We tend to change.
I don't. This was the first time it was brought upon me.
Think about when you quit a job or retire or get married or make some major change. It's like you may think about it, you may even sort of anticipate it and plan a little bit, but you sort of jump and do it. You get married, you quit, you go move, you do something, and then there's that rebuilding process. I find most people, and I see the same thing when death comes. Hurry up, a million things you got to do. When my parents died, immediately were Catholic. There's ceremonies, there's things, there's burials, there's expenses, there's bills. We didn't have time to stop. It was only later that it hit me. And that's when you get this kind of depression.
Right. You go through the
that
stages
delayed
of grief.
effect comes later. Yeah. You're sad, you're up, but there's things to be done in the moment. I'm moving. Somebody just died. Something happened, and there's things to be done. It isn't till later till you kind of get settled in. They're gone. I'm here. Something's changed. That reflection kicks in. At that point, it's kind of too late. You've already made all the choices. You can't go back. And so to have that in between space, I'm going to take a few days and reflect. I mean, who gets a chance to do that and everything when you change? Most people don't. And most people.
No, I think I might.
We think we
that.
don't. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you probably do have 2, 3, 4 days. Even in funerals, there's certain things you have to do. I mean, we have certain obligations.
Right.
But with
you got to
most
notify
situations,
people. You got to call the bank. You got to prepare the funeral arrangements. Bills have to be sorted out.
And is the world going to fall apart if you wait 3 days?
Boy, it sure feels like it.
It feels like it, but it's not.
Yeah.
And to ponder and take in what is the emotive response, what is your logical, physical response, and it gives you time to just think about it, and maybe not even, when you reflect on it, I think there's an idea of reflecting. That's all you're thinking about.
Yeah.
Reflecting doesn't have to be that. Reflecting can be on something totally different, takes your mind off of it, but your mind subconsciously is always working on it no matter what.
Right.
Maybe not consciously working on it. And it gives you an opportunity, I think, to make wiser choices.
Well, like on a simpler example, you get mad at somebody. You said this once, and your immediate answer is to jump in and type a reply or call them up or do something in the moment. Blah, 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 blah. And they always say, count to 10. Wait till tomorrow. I think you told me once how you were ready.
Wait till tomorrow.
Yeah, you did something, you typed it all up, you were mad about something, and then the next day you looked at it again and you're like, okay, I'm glad I didn't send that.
Yeah, I also send it many times to my wife to have her.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, yeah, to have her impression. What did this sound like?
Because I think we do have a tendency, when you leap, you just jump. Whatever the change is, it's hard for most of us to change, not for you, but for most of us, it's very difficult to make a change. It's very traumatic. It's very stressful. Any kind of change, good or bad. And then when we finally do it, no going back, no thinking about it. It's done. It's over. On to the next thing. There isn't that in between. There is no time in the tomb. There is no 3-day. Look at Charles. That we're doing this in the middle of September in 2022. We just lost Queen Elizabeth, longest-serving monarch in Western history here. And her son has to immediately assume they won't do the ceremony for 6 months or a year, but he's immediately proclaimed the king. The queen is dead. God live the king. There's something has to immediately happen here. There can't be an interregnum. There can't be a period in between one reign and another. So we're not set up as society to accept that pause in between changes. When you quit a job, most people don't wait a week or two to go start the new job. They start right away.
I wonder what the success rate is of that.
I don't know.
I know the divorce rate is second divorces have a much higher rate of divorce.
I've heard that.
I mean, second marriages have a much higher rate. I think it goes from 50 to 75%.
Because is it the boomerang effect? Is it the rebound? Is it something you just immediately jump into something without considering it? I see the value in this.
I think we have, the show may turn into a bit, we'll talk about the tomb between major life decisions, especially endings and beginnings, which I love, death, tomb, resurrection. That is something I plan to write on.
I hadn't thought about, I'm Catholic, cradle to grave Catholic here, and I know this story of Jesus laid in the tomb for 3 days. I never heard anybody talk about, I never thought about what happens in those days. I don't know, he's just on ice, waiting for the next thing. I'll tell you, I'm going to take you a little off for a second and see if you like this direction. If not, we'll come back. My favorite word in the English language is liminal. It's a word that doesn't get used very often, liminal. And I learned it in screenwriting because every movie in the world is about that liminal in-between space. You're coming of age. You're not a boy. You're not a man. You're a boy. That awkward in-between stage. You're on a train trip. You're trying to get from here to there. You're on a journey from this to this. And so the movie begins with the journey, and then there's an ending to the movie. You arrive, you make it, or you don't, whatever. But and the movie is all about that in-between awkward space. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get there. I don't know if I'm going to make it. That conflict, it's a very conflicted period, and yet every movie is basically about that in-between space. You're trapped on an island, you're waiting to get rescued, you're in an airplane and waiting to land, you're waiting for something, waiting to get married, you're trying to chase the girl, you're trying to do something. And yet none of us like to be in that liminal space. That's a very uncomfortable space between this and there, between here and there. We want to be either here or there. Beginning or end?
That's interesting. You know, when I left college, I had a decade of liminal space.
Yeah, I didn't know it was that long, but I know you did that. Yeah.
It was a decade of liminal space of doing things that I thought were productive, but they were not to my higher calling.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not until 30 years old I had a higher calling, and I went back and got my degrees and pursued a job in ministry and then a job in business.
And one of those things you told me about was hitchhiking across the country. That's a liminal journey. You're no longer there, but you're no longer here. You're on the way to becoming something. You're on a journey from one point to another. So you had lots of adventures and lots of things along the way, but it can't. The other thing is that liminal space can't last for long. Inevitably, there has to be a conclusion, so we think. You can't just live your life in a liminal space. Most of us can't. You got a job and you're going to the next one. You're out of a relationship, you're going to the next one. You're in a car from California going to New York. It's that in-between journey. So on the one hand, all these marvelous movies have made about that journey, that adventure, that quest. And yet life is all about resolving that and getting back to a beginning or an end. Get to the end and then start over again. There's a new beginning.
Yeah, start over. And you know, maybe part of what the show is about is the value, and I'm learning that it's not often used in our country, but it's the value of self-reflection.
Oh, yeah. No.
And not just a moment of thinking about it, but long-lasting moments of where we are.
There was a funny line. No, this is a weird thing that popped in my head, but the old movie Cannonball Run. They're racing across another one of those liminal journeys. Burt Reynolds and all these people are trying to race cars across the country, and there was some crazy Italian guy in it, and he threw his rear view mirror out the window, and he says, "What'd you do that for? What's behind me doesn't matter. I'm only going forward." And I think that's the way we live life. What's behind me doesn't matter. That was my father's quest. Never go back and reflect and think you made a choice, just keep going in that direction.
Yeah, but the going back and reflecting is essential. What did I like? What did I not like? What did I succeed at? What did I not succeed at?
Yeah.
What do I want to do in this next opportunity that I didn't do in the last opportunity?
Yeah.
What did I learn? And, you know, I could see almost taking a retreat, you know, between jobs, just a retreat by yourself. And
I always thought one of the reasons I went to law school, we never talked about this, but I went to law school for a year and I hated it and I did not do well in it. I did for a little while and then I just hated everything about it, stopped going to class and everything here. And I often wonder, had I taken a year off between college and law school, because I was so burned out by the end of, I wrote a big honors thesis and this big project, and I was totally burned out. And immediately then a couple months later I started into law school, which is even more intense. I wasn't ready for that. I probably should have had a year off to hitchhike the country or do something.
Well, you know, that's the big, you know, the gap year.
The gap year. I hear people talk, yeah. Right.
Yeah, and I think it's so valuable. Who is ready at 18 to decide what you want to do for the rest of your life?
I wasn't, and I think
you need to experience the world.
Yeah.
Or experience life, at least.
I knew one of my best friends, and his answer was he got married at 18 out of college, 3 weeks after he graduated, and that didn't last but a couple of years.
Oh. You know, I'm thinking... I'm thinking that the most vital part of my experience in the tomb or the time in between, I liked what our chairman of the board, Pete Callahan, I liked what he encouraged me. And I don't think Pete was thinking this way. Pete was just thinking strategically. He wanted a succession plan and wanted
Right.
and
Wanted
wanted
to buy
a
some
notice
time
to send out.
figure out what to do. Yeah.
But when he asked me not to say anything and on an honor system, I complied, and it was a forced silence on the subject. That was nice. I could not talk to anybody else. If you get other people's feedback, oh yeah, you need to leave, you're doing too much, you need to do this, and they're supporting all of your, very possibly incorrect assumptions.
Or pulling you back. What are you, crazy? What are you doing? You know what you're doing? The doubters.
But not talking to anybody, and only my wife and then my priest with his brilliant, death, tomb, resurrection idea, just that tomb settled me. And the beauty of the situation, the way it turned out, we redescribed my roles with the charity, and they fit right into my leadership development roles, my coaching roles, my teamwork roles, and my visionary sort of casting a future.
And your coaching roles. You took on some coaching roles in there.
I did take on, that's what I meant, leadership development. I took on coaching roles, and that was why I had to resign from the board, because I couldn't be employees' boss.
So let me give you a different
coach.
analogy. The show's called The Next Chapter, a book image. Would you ever hesitate between turning pages? I come to the end of a section, you immediately rush into the next section. Or you can't wait to get to where does this go? Rather than pausing and reflecting on what you read. I have this image of you turning to turn the page and then just holding it there and thinking about from it.
It's not quite holding it there. It's very simpler to hold it. It's a very simple thought to hold it there. But what I do is I go back and read my last chapter's highlights, because I'm a yellow highlighter. I go back and read the last chapter's highlights too.
Raise your hands out there, folks, if you've ever done that. I don't think I see many hands do it. When I get to the end of a chapter, I might highlight it and think I'm going to go back, but I'm on a race to get to the end.
Yeah, I journal every morning, and I read the previous day's journal just to see what I was all about that day, and then I
give you a different analogy. In a movie, have you ever stopped halfway through a movie and gone back and rewatched it? Say, well, let me make sure I understand what's
I have never done that. I've gone back and rewatched a movie that I didn't understand. I just saw a fabulous movie, which I'll give a little plug for, which is really weird, off the chart weird, but it's 3,000 Years of Longing.
Never even heard of it.
And it's about Idris Elba's in it, and Jessica, is it not Jessica Chastain?
She's big these days. I don't know.
No, but it's not Jessica.
I'll look it up.
But she's given 3 wishes, and she doesn't want to take the 3 wishes. And the story goes back about 3,000 years of longing of the genie needs to get out of the bottle, and the only way he can do it is if he gets to grant 3 wishes.
Mm-hmm.
And every time he grants 1 wish, the entire world is changed because of this wish for that one individual. It's just not, I want to be happier here. Everything has changed, and so it changes the 2nd wish, and it changes the 3rd wish, and it's a brilliant, brilliant movie.
So imagine the idea of starting a film and stopping, and it was Tilda Swinton.
Tilda Swinton, yes.
In the movie. Once a movie starts, this is really weird, I can't stop it. Even if I'm tired, even if I don't like the film, I got to get to the end. I might skip ahead sometimes a little bit. This isn't going anywhere. Let's get to... But I can never stop and go back. I can't put it on pause.
Oh, I may go back a little bit. And one thing we do if we're doing a new season on a show, we always go back and watch the last episode, if not the last 2 episodes of the previous season, so we're caught up.
You're already living a reflective life. You're reflecting, going back at the book and reflecting what you did, taking a pause between a change to think about it and reflect. My hat's off to you. I honestly don't think I've ever done that. I might struggle to make a change. Lord knows I've struggled to make changes in my life. But once I do, I go forward. Once I start the change, once I start the momentum, once I start the movie, I'm on a race till it ends, to the next point.
I think there's another value that comes into play here. I hadn't intended on values emerging, like reflection, but also is patience. Is that we are not patient. We don't want to wait for the end to appear at its natural time.
Mm-hmm.
We want to force it. We want a decision.
Yes.
And then we put ourselves in a dirt shit situation.
Yeah.
That we're saying, oh my goodness, what did I do? And I've got to yet quit again.
I had I won't mention who, but there was a show host here who was here for years, very successful person, and he said that in between time between coming up with an idea and implementing it, that time in the tomb, in your analogy, was the most painful thing to him. Once he came up with a thing, then he couldn't wait to do it, to try it, to get it going. There was no reflection about it. Yes, let's go. Boom, perfect.
And do you know the chaos that causes? Do you know seriously, because I've seen leaders like that. Do you know the organizational chaos that goes on? Because new initiatives require lots of infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And they are not prepared. They just say, let's start this new thing, and then we'll figure out the infrastructure on the way. Mm-hmm. And it turns out to be a cluster. A cluster mess.
I think there's another word that usually goes with that. So you've brought up something, 3 days in the tomb, the power of pause, that in-between period between here and there. You've made a decision. Now you put it on pause for a moment before you put it into practice, before you start. You take a hiatus. You take like they do in scholars, a sabbatical in between this and that.
A very brief, albeit very brief.
Yeah,
sabbatical.
But whatever it is, you take that gap year between college and starting something.
Oh, yeah.
You do something that lets you to just breathe, reflect, and then move forward. Rather than our knee-jerk reaction, I struggle to change, and when I finally do, I'm all in. I go as fast as I can. Once I start the movie, I want to race to the end.
Well, race to the end, but then what are you going to do after you get to the end?
Well, you said life is about beginning and ends, and I think that's the way my life has been. I'm always beginning something new, and then at some point, they all seem to come to an end, or many of them come to an end.
Yeah, it's like the Myers-Briggs difference between the types, the P and the J. The J starts a project and finishes a project. They're very linear, completion-oriented, very organized. Their closets are all separated according to the right kind of clothes, the colors, and all that. And then there's the P, which is which represents the impulsive, spontaneous kind of person. And so it says of the so we say when I taught that, I'm certified in that discipline. And when we taught that, we used to say the J starts a project, finishes a project. Starts a project, finishes a project.
Right.
A P starts a project, and then starts a project, and then starts a project, because the end is not all that important. But for me,
you've been to my house. You've been in my home. I got a million half-finished projects.
I've been in your office. I don't need to go into your home.
I'll give you another analogy. So for a while, I went through a period where I built bars and restaurants. A bizarre thing I fell into, and I was part owner of a couple of them, Irish pubs, and because I had success at that, people came to me and said, "Can you help me do it? Mostly get the entitlements, the city licenses, which are hard to get, and come up with a concept." I found I loved the start. I hated the completion.
Well, it's the day-to-day work. There's the rush of the start, and then there's the monotonous day-to-day doing the books. You know,
part of it was that. Part of it was it wasn't as much fun, and it was sort of coming to right now, it can be anything you want it to be. Once it starts to come together, then we've made a decision. It's only going to be this. Should we go back and do it? No.
It's forming an identity.
Forming, and so you're losing options. It's taking shape. It can't be anything anymore. The great Alfred Hitchcock, I'm such a film buff as you are, supposedly said he thought through every movie in his mind. And he said, I loved creating them. He said, I hated shooting them.
Oh, really? I've never heard that.
I'd already done it in my head. It's just, there was no creativity, and it was drudgery to him to do. To think and imagine was wonderful, and it could be anything. Once you do it, you're following a script.
That's great. You know what I'd like to do now, Paul? I kind of want to make this a briefer podcast because I think we've pretty much made the point.
Okay.
And I want to encourage listeners to, even if you're not Christian, the events proceeded as they were, at least in the text. And that there is not just a death, resurrection, and ascension. They didn't happen in a 5-day period. That there is this death, tomb, and resurrection. Before we were resurrected to new life, there is a time of mending, a time of pondering, a time of reflecting. And I think that's what I want to encourage everybody. It's lessons from the tomb, and I want to tell you, as a happy ending, my work with the charity now is more meaningful than it's ever been, because I'm on my track, not on somebody else's track, but my track that fits directly with the needs of the organization. And that happened only because our chairman of the board had me sit for a week and think. So I want to encourage everybody. Death, tomb, resurrection. Let's focus on the tomb. Well, that's all I got, unless you got something else, Paul?
No, I can't get any better than that.
Okay. I want to thank everybody for tuning in for the next chapter with Charlie. And please be sure to check out our website, the nextchapter.life. Subscribe. You can like the show on your favorite platform, or recommend it to somebody else. We are growing word of mouth, and our podcasts are starting to get a very nice listening audience.
Yes, it is.
And I would like to encourage you to pass it on to somebody else who might find something like this interesting.
You had some likes over the last few weeks. We'd like to see more.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.